Good afternoon, everybody.
We're experiencing technical difficulties.
No, we're not.
Forward.
Good afternoon. Recognizing a quorum, I am calling this meeting of the Cannabis Control Commission to order at 2 p.m. on June 21st, 2018. Can I ask, can everybody hear me in the back of the room? Commissioner Flanagan is joining us remotely. Commissioner Flanagan, would you say hello and make sure that everybody can hear you?
Hi, I'm right here.
Can people hear Commissioner Flanagan? No, Jen, Commissioner, you can speak a little bit more loudly if that's okay. Could you try again?
I assure you that when I have something to say, they will all hear it.
They heard that.
Yeah, for those of us that have worked with you for 9.5 months, there's no surprise in that statement. Thank you, Commissioner Flanagan. Can I ask, with 5 television cameras, 6 microphones, and various streaming devices, can I ask unnecessarily, is this meeting being recorded? Let me put the public on notice that this meeting is indeed being recorded. Can I ask also people to put their cell phones on silent or mute? Thank you. First of all, welcome to summer. I hope that summer turns out to be a better season weather-wise than fall. Not that any of us are going to have any time to enjoy it, but I want to thank the Health Policy Commission again for their accommodations. We really appreciate that. We appreciate that they've reconfigured this room given the turnout today, and really appreciate their help and support. I have mentioned that Commissioner Flanagan is joining us remotely. As a result, all the votes that we take today will be roll call votes, since we do have one of the commissioners participating remotely. So let's get started. This is obviously a significant day in the Commission's journey thus far. It's the first time that we will take up the issue of issuing a license to an applicant, and that's obviously an important milestone. It goes without saying that I want to thank the staff for their extraordinarily hard work and diligent work getting us to this point, represented by a few of the staff that have been involved in this process, but literally everybody on the team has been involved in getting us to this point. And so I just wanted to recognize that contribution and that hard work and say thank you. Even though this is a significant milestone, I also want to stress that it's the beginning, not the end. This is the first license that we're taking up for deliberation. We expect as we go forward over the next few weeks and months that every meeting will have a few additional ones, depending again totally on the inflow of applications, but this is going to become a regular process. And so really today is day one. It's the beginning, not the end, but still I hope you agree a significant milestone for the Commission and one that we're proud to have gotten to. With respect to the agenda, obviously I think the reason that there are all these cameras here is because of the licensing conversation. It's not the only thing on the agenda. However, we are going to skip the approval of minutes from previous meetings. We only have one outstanding, which is from last week's meeting, and that just needs a little bit more time and editing. So we'll get to that at the next Commission meeting. So there's no minutes approval on the that will happen today. The Executive Director is going to go through his standard report, including staffing update and just giving you an update on the status of the number and types of license applications that we've gotten and where they are in process. We do have one license application that the staff has done its work on, that we've gotten necessary responses both from our background check company as well as from the city or town in which the license is proposed to operate. And so we are ready to listen to the staff's recommendation, debate, discuss, and vote on that license application. There is one new piece of business that I was not aware of when I prepared this agenda, which is that Commissioner Doyle would like to make a statement about the Energy and Environmental Working Group, which had its first meeting, if I'm correct, yesterday?
Yes.
Great. So that will be after we discuss the license application, and then we'll talk about next week's meeting. So again, thank you for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to the executive director. The first order of business I know is that he's going to introduce our newest staff member. So, Mr. Executive Director.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you indicated, the first item of my report is to include an update to our staffing. I'm pleased to introduce the Commission's newest hire, which is our Chief of Staff. Erica Chabelli, to my right, is the newest Chief of Staff, or the Chief of Staff of the Commission. She comes to us actually from the Health Policy Commission. Prior to that, she was Legislative Director and Counsel to Senator James Welch in the Senate. She is a graduate of UMass Amherst and received her JD from Western New England School of Law. So very excited to have, I am particularly excited to have Erica join the Commission and looking forward to her contributions moving forward.
She's promised to whip us into shape, which I think she might underestimate the degree of difficulty, but we're certainly her willing victims in that. So welcome on board. Mr. Executive Director.
So moving forward in my report is an update on the license applications. Our usual slides are available. Going through the numbers here, there are 1,501 applications. That breaks down to 138 pending. Again, that is at least one packet being submitted to the Commission. 79 have been withdrawn, and there are 1,284 that are incomplete and therefore in some stage of either being filled out or in some way being completed and not yet submitted. That breaks down to the following: 2 craft cooperatives, 35 cultivation, 30 establishment agents, 8 micro business, 18 product manufacturer, 3 research facility, 38 retail, 1 transportation with an existing establishment license, and finally 3 third-party transportation. That is the breakdown of 138 packets or individual applications that have at least one packet having been submitted to the Commission. Moving forward, we have 58 applications that have submitted all 4 packets, and that are therefore under review. As a reminder, these are folks that have represented to us that their applications are complete. Our first step is to confirm or verify that they are in fact complete. That breaks down to 20 cultivation, 2 micro business, 14 manufacturer, 3 research facility, 18 retail, and 1 transportation with an existing marijuana establishment license. That's the accumulation of the 58. The R&D priority, there are 38 applications that have submitted R&D priority, 38 applications that have secured R&D priority status, 3 that have secured economic empowerment status or priority status, and 17 that are general applicants. Those 58 applications represent 29 separate entities. And finally is the map that has been put together over the past several weeks. It indicates where those locations break down across Massachusetts. What is helpful, I think, for context is the difference between this week and last week. There are 2 applications from Middlesex County that have been added, bringing that total to 7, and 3 from Bristol County, bringing that total to 8. Of course, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Any questions for the Executive Director? Okay. Anything else in your report before we move on to the next item of business?
Not at this time, no.
Okay, thank you. So the next item of business is to receive the staff's recommendation with respect to a license application, to have the opportunity to ask questions. We will discuss and debate at the commission level and then take a vote on the license application. I would ask the executive director, as you're going through the staff's recommendation, if you could start by describing the process that has happened since we received the application and the work with the staff and third parties, so that it's clear what's gone into the recommendation that you're about to deliver, Mr. Executive Director.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin by, as you indicated, discussing the process by which this application was received by the Commission, and of course the process by which we then reviewed it. The application submitted before you today for consideration for a provisional license. The entity is in the name of Sierra Naturals. The application number is MCN 281252. It is a Tier 3 cultivation license. It's an indoor operation. As you may recall, a Tier 3 permits 10,001 to 20,000 square feet. The location is 13 Commercial Way in Milford. This application was submitted to the commission in various stages of each of the 4 packets. The final packet was received by the commission on April 18th. During that time, or after that time, the commission and staff, and I want to point out and identify and compliment the staff of having done their review in a very diligent and thorough way. Specifically, I want to recognize and acknowledge our Director of Licensing, Kyle Potvin, to my right, and Yao Gibi, our Chief of Investigations and Enforcement, who oversees the licensing process, to Kyle's right. The two of them, as well as myself, really dug into the details and the meat of the application from a management and operations profile perspective, as well as the application of intent. The background check process was conducted, as you may recall from our previous conversations, by our third-party vendor, Creative Services, who conducted the substance of the background check and reported back to us, which I will get into in a bit. The first step of our review is to review for completeness. That includes evaluating whether each of the fields of the application have been completed, that all relevant and appropriate and required documents have in fact been submitted, and of course that the application fee has been received. Once deemed to be complete, we then generate a report to CSI as our background check vendor, and they commence their activity. If forms relative to the background check in this instance were not available on our website prior, we reached out to the applicant, secured those forms, and shared those with CSI as well to authorize the background check. We also generated a notice to the town of Milford seeking certification that the applicant is compliant with all local zoning and bylaws. That information went to the town of Milford and was received back by the commission, I believe it was June 8th. So again, as I mentioned in previous meetings, from a process standpoint, third-party interaction is required for our review. That includes the municipal notice as well as the background check. All of those things have been returned to the commission, and our review of the management and operations profile has been completed as well, which is why the staff is bringing it to you today for your consideration. Going through the application, I can start to kind of dig into some of the specifics to identify what we found in the course of our review.
Can I just interrupt for a second? Are there any questions with respect to the process before we get into the content of the application?
No.
Okay.
Great, thank you. So as I indicated, this is a Tier 3 cultivation facility, an indoor operation in the town of Milford. I want to disclose that the applicant has other applications pending before the commission. That includes a product manufacturing license, a research license, as well as a transportation with an existing marijuana establishment license. We are in the process of reviewing those applications as well. Today, the only consideration is for the application for Tier 3 cultivation. There are individuals listed on the license that have been reviewed and subject to a background check by the commission. They're identified for you. This information as well that I provided for you, our intention is to be able to put this information on our website as of this afternoon if possible, really at the earliest possible time, to ensure that this information is available for folks to review themselves. So I will go through them. It's Michael Dundas is identified as the Chief Executive Officer, and I apologize if I badger anybody's name. Lewis Carter is a director, David Rosenberg is a director, Robert Edelstein is a director, Eric Wardrop, director, William Sanger, executive and officer, Timothy Kreitis, manager, and Michelle Foley as a manager. There are also 2 entities identified in this establishment as having a percentage of ownership. That is Green Partners Investor LLC as well as Green Partners Sponsor LLC. As I indicated, this applicant is also has secured a certified priority application through their existing medical dispensary license. This is a co-located establishment, implying or meaning that they intend to co-locate their existing medical operation with their adult use business in the town of Milford. They have secured their final certificate of registration through the Department of Public Health for dispensing, cultivation, and processing. They have executed a host community agreement with the town of Milford. It was executed on March 12th, 2018, and have certified both the applicant as well as the community that is in fact the case. They hosted their community outreach meeting on April 10th. It was posted in the Milford Daily News They notified the municipality as well as any abutters, and they certified that they are in compliance with those meeting requirements. There have been no objections identified from the community, and as I indicated, the municipal response was secured by the Commission on June 8th, 2018. A summary of their plan of positive impact, especially in areas of disproportionate impact, was included within the application, and some of the contents are identified for you in that summary, and namely indicating that they intend to hold multi-participant educational workshops and seminars, and that they intend to establish a preference for hiring otherwise qualified individuals from communities of disproportionate impact, especially within the proximity of their facility in the town of Milford. Specific to the suitability review, I can disclose and share that there are no concerns that have arisen from the background check. That includes on any individuals associated with the application as well as the entities associated with it. There was no disclosure of any past civil or criminal actions, and no disclosure of any occupational licenses that have been issued or in Massachusetts or in any other jurisdictions. That includes business interests as well. And next, that there is a certificate of good standing that has been issued by the Secretary of the Commonwealth as well as the Department of Revenue. I'm happy to discuss next the management and operations profile, which is, again, really where the Commission has reviewed in substance and not relied on any sort of third-party certification or verification of information. This, again, is what they supplied to us and are presented on their application. So they intend to be operational at full capacity, which is, again, up to a 20,000 square foot facility within 4 months of the date of the issuance of the provisional license. However, they do have a reasonable excess of inventory in their current facility to ensure first that patient demand is always fulfilled, and then next, if possible, to shift any excess not required to meet patient demand to the adult use market. Their proposed hours of operation are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They submitted summaries of the following plans, which are required by regulation: a security plan, a prevention of diversion plan, a storage of marijuana plan, a transportation plan, inventory procedures, quality control and testing procedures, personnel procedures, dispensing procedures, record-keeping procedures, maintenance of financial records policy, and a diversity plan. These summaries are fully compliant with the regulations, and they were determined by staff to be substantially compliant with our regulations. However, full compliance, of course, will be reviewed during any inspections and audits, which may be required before final license is issued. A summary of their diversity plan was submitted to the Commission. They outlined their goals as promoting equity among minority, women's, veterans, people with disabilities, and people of all gender identities and sexual orientations in their operations, business partnerships, and surrounding communities. Their plan includes training sessions regarding embracing diversity to achieve organizational objectives. In fact, their diversity plan was about 5 pages long. The applicant plans to increase their production of their existing medical marijuana supply already in existence upon approval. They provided us a 2-page summary on their policies and procedures related to cultivating. Because it is a cultivation facility, there was no summary necessary of any products that they intend to produce or sell. And their plan for obtaining products is that they have an existing medical marijuana supply, and they plan to, if possible, transfer inventory once a final license is issued. Therefore, and I want to indicate as well, this was the first application received by the Commission as a timely application, which is why it's being brought to you today. It is brought to you in order as the way it was submitted, as I indicated prior. That was on April 18th. So therefore, based upon our review of the information submitted to the Commission, based upon the findings of the background check that has been conducted on the applicant, and based upon the certification that they are in fact compliant with municipal zoning and bylaws, staff is recommending the issuance of a provisional license, however, with the following conditions: that the final license be subject to the required individual successfully completing a fingerprint-based check of state and national criminal history databases, that the final license be subject to certification that the applicant remains in compliance with DPH regulations relative to the medical use of marijuana, that a final license be subject to an inspection and audit to ascertain compliance with our regulations, that the final license is subject to the inspection and audit to ascertain that their facilities are compliant with all applicable state and local codes, bylaws, ordinances, and regulations, that the applicant shall cooperate with and provide the information to the Commission, our investigators, agents, and employees upon request, and that a provisional license subject to the payment of the appropriate license fee, that the provisional license be subject to the payment of appropriate license fee, again pursuant to our regulations. As I indicated, this recommendation is based upon the applicant's demonstrated compliance with the laws and regulations of the Commonwealth, their suitability for licensure, and upon the evaluation of the thoroughness of the applicant's responses to the required criteria. We've conducted this due diligence review of the application, and as of this date, the applicant has demonstrated their compliance with the laws and regulations of the Commonwealth and their suitability for licensure. And again, accordingly, the applicant is therefore recommended for provisional licensure with the previously mentioned conditions. Again, I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Yeah, before we begin to discuss and take this up as a vote, are there questions for the Commissioner or for the Executive Director? Any Commissioners? Commissioner McBride?
I want to thank the Executive Director and staff for I know the tremendous amount of work that went into putting this together. My first question has to do with the entities and the roles in the marijuana establishment. There are two entities listed, Green Partners Investor LLC with 50% of ownership and Green Partners Sponsor LLC with 50% of ownership. Who is Green Partners? Can you tell me a little bit more about those investors?
Sure. So as entities, and I'll disclose what I can. As entities, they were subject to a background check by our outside vendor, Creative Services, as well. By and large, those the entities are comprised of the same individuals on the license application. Don't believe that was me.
I have no idea what that was.
I'm on mute.
God, I hope that's not me. That would be really embarrassing.
It's our PowerPoint. As I was saying,
Yes, I'm sorry for the distraction.
the entities are largely comprised of the individuals listed on the application. There were some other individuals who fell below the 10% threshold that would require either disclosure or a background check on the individual status. But by and large, they're comprised of the individuals listed on the application as well.
Commissioner Doyle?
I don't have questions, I have comments.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
Commissioner Title, do you have any questions for the Executive Director before we start discussion?
Yes. First, I just want to thank the staff for your hard work, for not compromising speed or quality, and for the very thoughtful way that you presented the information to us in executive summary. Director Collins, because we didn't have access to the background checks, could you describe the process by which they were examined and documented?
Sure. So as indicated, the information that is sent or shared with Creative Services is largely the information that is identified and shared through the background check packet. That information is shared with CSI. Again, there's a number of releases that are required from the individuals that are contained within the application. CSI then goes forth and conducts their review. It is, as we previously discussed at the commission meetings, substantive from a criminal background check standpoint, a driving history standpoint, as well as any business relationships or kind of other professional licenses that they may have. There's also a media search and social media search that is conducted. This information is all compiled within a packet of information returned to the commission for our review. Any information that would be necessary to further review, which is largely discretionary from the commission standpoint, as far as if information needs to be followed up on, or if there's something that may run afoul of our regulations or require, again, additional action from the commission, say, for instance, a suitability review committee, that would be identified for us to then take additional action on. In the context of this application, there's no information that was identified as having run afoul of our regulations or the law, as well as no concerns raised by CSI in their process. That information is retained by the commission. Any information that we would then need to follow up on, we can ask, of course, CSI to do additional research or information gathering if necessary. We could choose to do it ourselves as well. In the context of this application, though, nothing was raised that would require us to go any further, and no suitability review committee was was convened or conducted. And so therefore, again, we're confident that this individual or this individual application and the individuals contained within it would be ultimately deemed suitable by the commission. Of course, that is the commission's discretion as well.
The wind down funds portion,
Sure.
when I looked at that part, it was significantly higher than I thought it was going to be, which is certainly not a problem, but I was wondering if it spans multiple applications or how you evaluated that.
Sure, so we evaluate it in the context of this specific application. Although what I would imagine is that as we dig into additional applications, that one, given that this is the entity that has maintained that account, my understanding or my assumption, I should say, is that that may span additional applications or potential licenses as well, thereby serving as a wind down account for the entire entity as opposed to this specific application. But it certainly would be available in the event that the commission required access to it for this license specifically.
And then last question, I know that we didn't ask for the community host agreement as part of the application, we just asked for the evidence that it had been signed. But at any point in this process, are we asking for the community host agreement?
At any point in this process, we did not. We received certification that it was executed by both Sierra Naturals as the applicant as well as the town of Milford, and then again throughout the course of that municipal notice that went to the senior town, in this case Milford, they certified that they were compliant, but we did not ask for the host community agreement in this context.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I add?
Go ahead, Commissioner Doyle.
I'm going to shamelessly use this as a moment to plug the fact that we are sending out a municipal survey at the end of this town meeting season, which will ask all communities if they've executed a host community agreement to please share it with us.
Thank you. Great practice. Commissioner Flanagan, do you have any questions?
No, not at this time.
Thank you. Then Commissioner Groh.
So one of the conditions of final licensure that we are proposing, or that's being proposed by staff for us to vote on, is the final licensee being subject to acquired individuals successfully completing a fingerprint-based check of state and national criminal history databases. It's my understanding, based on this, that that has not yet happened. Can you tell us, and really, I guess, inform the potential licensee when that process might be standing up and what that process would look like?
Thank you, great question. It's that is something that is required by statute, that there be a national fingerprint, national criminal history background check using the safest system. That is something that requires several layers of authorization, which is still not yet complete, but we are optimistic that it'll be complete and operational as early as next week. And that will then allow us to access that fingerprint-based national criminal history review. It is something that first requires federal approval as far as our ability as an agency to access that information and retain it. It then requires us to work with the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security, as well as the Department of Criminal Justice Information Services, to again identify ourselves as an agency able to receive that information. There are certain data security and storage requirements with that as well. Those steps have been completed and satisfied. The next step is to the CJIS and EOPS use a third-party vendor, Ident2Go. They have to create a portal on their page or an access page for us to access. They are building that out now, which should be, again, hopefully completed by next week, where the applicant, we will identify that where they can go to secure that information. They need to go sign up, create an appointment. There are locations across Massachusetts, about 20 or so, I understand, that they can then go get their fingerprints conducted. That'll generate the search, which is then shared with us. What I'm confident in doing as far as recommending this as a condition is that we've already conducted a relatively, or in fact, a comprehensive background check on the entity as well as any individuals associated with that application. Ideally, this information would confirm what we already know. However, because of course it is statutory, we are working to make sure that it is functional. As you also may recall, the Commission recently decided as policy that applicants themselves will pay I think it's a $35 fee associated with the fingerprint check. That is also being configured through the Ident2Go page to allow them to do that and comply with that process. So it is a condition of final licensure, although I'm relatively confident that given the build out, which is also this process as far as getting federal approval, as well as any other state blessings as far as developing the portal, it began in earnest in November, so it is a very time-consuming process, and we are just now coming to its culmination. So it is some of it is a timing issue, but again, we've already conducted a very substantive background check. Ideally, this would just confirm information that we're already aware of. However, of course, if it does not, then we would act accordingly there as well. So that, therefore, is why it's listed as a condition of final license.
Other questions for the executive director and staff before we begin our conversation, our discussion? Commissioner Doral,
Thank you.
you mentioned that you had some comments, so I thought I'd let you go first.
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to irritate the entire room by also thanking the staff and particularly General Counsel Christine Bailey for her work on the conditions and the recommendations. But I'm going to ask that we add a little more to the conditions. Language to be determined, but essentially to the effect that the application is dependent upon the materials that we received and the granting of the provisional license, therefore dependent on those materials. And then also...
I'm sorry, could you, I didn't quite understand what you were suggesting, I apologize.
So essentially, we're basing the provisional license on the materials we've received from the applicant.
Okay.
Just making that very
Yep.
clear.
And then also a condition that the applicant notify the commission and seek approval as appropriate when the circumstances described in those materials change, which is required under the regulations in section 500.104, but I just want to make that crystal clear in the provisional license.
So if I just make sure I get this right, you're essentially putting two additional requirements in terms of, or conditions with respect to provisional approval, or suggesting that we do so?
Right, and
Okay.
one of them really
Yeah,
just
one was-
clarifies something that's already said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure I'm getting this right. Thank you. Other comments? No? Commissioner Flanagan, do you have comments or thoughts or concerns?
I just want to thank the staff. I think that they've certainly been working under very hectic deadlines, and I think that they've been a very great support system to us. So I appreciate all the work that they've done. This is a big day for everybody.
Thank you. Commissioner McBride? Any comments or concerns?
No, I guess the one thing that I would say is that this, and I think this is really more for putting this in context. So we have received a host of material as required under the regulations in this initial component, but I think most of my questions are really going to arise between now and really in the final licensure.
Sure.
So I have a huge amount of appreciation for the work that has gone into putting together this recommendation, knowing full well that we still have a ton of work, the staff still has a ton of work ahead of them before we get to the final licensure phase. And I think it's really at that point in time where the rubber meets the road. And I'm going to have a lot of questions at that point in time about how what we see on paper is implemented in the physical location. So I think
that makes sense. Does it make sense then, therefore, before I ask for a motion to approve the recommendation, does it make sense, Mr. Executive Director, to describe the process if we were to, hypothetically, if we were to vote to approve the staff's recommendation to issue a provisional license, what happens next prior to the point that Commissioner talked about in terms of a vote on a final license?
Sure, I'm happy to talk about what we would do next, as well as what we would ask the applicant to also do. So to Commissioner McBride's point, which I think is a good one to add some context to our process, I also wanted to take a moment to speaking to process that our review was facilitated and managed through our entire electronic portal, which did require a significant document upload, but the entire process was managed digitally for us to go into our portal, review the application materials, review any materials that were submitted and uploaded as a PDF. And so I think that this system remains very functional as well as very agile for us to continue using. So to Commissioner McBride's point, it was reviewing materials that have been supplied to us and reflecting or comparing that to our regulations. And the next step is to actually go to the applicant's location, conduct an inspection, as well as the other conditions being met as far as getting and securing the fingerprint-based check of state and national criminal databases. And as well, because this location is a co-located, or is proposed to be a co-located adult use and medical use of marijuana program or facility, to work with the Department of Public Health to ensure that the applicant can remain in compliance with our regulations, while also simultaneously remaining in compliance with the Department of Public Health's regulations. The inspection process is intended to be thorough, again, to Commissioner McBride's point, to ensure that what was represented on the application and in the application materials is what is actually in the physical location around the physical plant, and that their plans, as presented to us, given that physical setup, can be and will remain compliant with our regulations throughout that process. So there are a number of steps that the applicant is required to take based on this provisional recommendation for licensure, or recommendation for provisional licensure. There are a number of steps that we have to take as well, namely that inspection and audit component to, again, see with our own eyes, as well as physically inspecting any build out that may be required for them to get to full capacity in their facility. That is going to be something that requires us to go to Milford, to visit the facility, inspect it with Yao and his team, and come back to the commission and be able to confidently say that what was represented in their application materials is in fact what they have in Milford, and for us to relay that confidence to the commission and satisfy, again, any curiosity or any concerns that you may have relative to their ability to not just comply on day one, but maintain compliance moving forward from an operational standpoint. So this is an important moment, confirming that the information secured and reviewed by us is in fact in compliance, but then also the next step is going to be really being able to confirm that from a physical and visual standpoint, and making sure that any concerns that we may have during the course of that inspection, again, can also be satisfied moving forward. So.
Okay. I think Commissioner McBride go first, then Commissioner. No, go ahead, Commissioner McBride. Thank you. You were reaching for your microphone first.
I was just going to ask if we have a sense of, are we talking about one inspection, multiple inspections? Do we sort of know what it looks like?
Hard to say. I would guess, or I would wager certainly more than one. Reason being is that we are still a relatively small, but as well as new team, and there's a lot of material that we will be required to go through, and I think a lot of discussion amongst ourselves to ensure that when we come back to the commission to take further action on this license and whatever that may occur, that we can confidently say that we are comfortable as a staff, that we understand their business operation, that we understand the various plans that they're required to supply and maintain, that we understand them to be in good condition as well as practical and operational in their actual use. So my guess is certainly going to be more than one inspection, but my honest answer is we will be there as often as required to ensure that we can confidently relate to you as a commission that they are in fact prepared for and otherwise eligible for final licensure. So as many as it takes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Tyler.
So I actually just had a procedural question, and I think it's for Commissioner Doyle. The 2 additional conditions that you mentioned, which I support, do you want to make a motion to add those before I make my comments, or do you want me to make them?
Sure, that's good. That's a very good point. So I can do that if you want to make your comments first, and then I'll make the motion, or do you?
Mine are on a different subject.
So let's why don't we make the motion
Okay.
on your comments, and then we can go on to the.
Actually, I think we need the underlying motion first.
The underlying.
This is where I look at general counsel.
Yes.
Because I need a motion to amend. Do you know what I mean? I need the underlying motion to amend.
Okay.
Right.
Why don't we then can we table your
Oh,
motion and then
absolutely.
we'll come back with the entirety of the motion and the amendment to the motion? So go ahead, Commissioner
Sure.
Keitel.
All right. Thank you for clearing that.
Thank
This is
you.
the first time we're doing this.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have almost no concerns and no questions in the whole application, but just a couple. First, so on the policies and procedures for cultivating, I think this will be dealt with in inspection, but I wanted to make sure. So it noted that the cultivation operations meet all energy efficiency and equipment standards established by the commission, but I wasn't clear, since it didn't mention in the procedures the lighting power densities, if there were plans to comply by March 23rd, 2019, which is the date that the RMDs have. So is that something that will be looked into during inspection?
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Yes, please.
So that is something that we would imagine would come up, of course, during the course of any inspection or visit to the facility, but as you indicated, as an existing R&D, they do have that period to come into compliance. So the discussion would mostly be, are you compliant today, and if not, what is your plan to come into compliance? And then, of course, to report back to the commission to ensure that you as a commissioner are comfortable with that plan as identified or as relayed to us.
Thank you. Secondly, I really appreciated the summary provided by the staff and the examination on both the diversity plan and the community impact plan. Because there are very few specific recommendations or very few requirements in our regulations with respect to those two plans, I'd like to get in the habit of discussing them thoroughly to make sure that we're intentional and deliberate in how we analyze them, and also so that future applicants can have a sense of how we'll be looking at those plans. So if it's okay, can I give my comments on both those plans?
Please.
And then open it? Okay, so the diversity plan was 5 pages long, as Director Collins mentioned. It started with the reasons for why to implement a diversity plan, including helping to remediate the damaging effects of policy of prohibition, and an equally important reason to recognize that operational tactics and strategic business plans are made stronger by a diverse pool of contributors and opinions in the mix. Goes on to outline the diversity and inclusion related beliefs, benefits, and core values. And then in the meat of the plan, it explains the 4 key objectives, which are to recruit a diverse workforce, retention strategies to keep whom they recruit, community engagement, an inclusive and ethical stance on conducting business. And then in detail, it explains the training program that the entire workforce, leaders and employees will go through. There are not any quantitative measures, but the regulation requirement is to submit and adhere to a diversity plan, and I think that it's specific enough to allow them to keep records of whether they're adhering to it or not. Moving on to, unless anyone else.
Any comments on that? Commissioner Flanagan?
No, I'm good with it.
Okay, keep going then, Commissioner Keitel.
Moving on to the community impact plan. So the regulation requires the plan to positively impact areas of disproportionate impact as defined by the commission. It's 2 pages long, which is fine. The whole application I thought was very concise. There are no qualitative or quantitative measures. There's a significant portion devoted to why the definitions of areas of disproportionate impact are both too broad and too narrow, but it doesn't suggest any alternate definitions that would be used. It goes on to describe 3 areas of program offerings: 1, multi-participant education workshops and seminars, but it doesn't list how many or what the topics would be. Then it goes on to employment. Establish a preference for hiring otherwise qualified individuals from communities of disproportionate impact in proximity to Milford, but it doesn't explain how that would take place. And it also was not reflected in the personnel policies or the qualifications and training section. And then 3rd, support local business. And the bullet point is to host certain initiatives within communities of disproportionate impact in proximity to Milford. Doesn't say what those initiatives are. And the bullet points are meeting space, meals and restaurants, event space, and lodging, which are not clear to me what those initiatives are. I don't think this is sufficient for a plan, which is defined as a detailed proposal for doing or achieving something. However, looking at the date that this was submitted, which was the first one to be submitted April 18th, that was before the SERA Accelerator program was announced, which I believe from what I've seen of it would easily meet the requirements of the plan. So I would...
I will propose, it's normal to make the underlying motion first, that's why I'm struggling.
I'll do whatever way, like, well, let's defer to our general counsel. How would you like us to do this, general counsel?
If you want to, make an underlying motion first.
Okay, and then we'll vote on amending it. Is that correct? Fine.
Yeah, you.
Okay, that's fine.
Motion and then after
That's why we have a
discussion.
general counsel.
Yep.
So thank you very much. So then I'm asking for a motion to approve the staff recommendation that we issue a provisional license with the following 6 conditions. The 6 conditions are as articulated by the executive director about fingerprint, final license subject to certification the applicant remains in compliance with DPH regulations, that subject to an inspection and audit to ascertain compliance with our regulations, that final inspection and audit to ascertain the facilities are compliant with applicable state and local codes, that the applicant provides cooperation in response to requests for information from the commission, its investigators, and staff, and that the license fee is paid appropriate to the category of license being requested. So I'm asking for a motion to approve the staff's recommendation with those 6 conditions.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so let the record show that Commissioner Title made the motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner Doyle. We're going to do a voice vote, as I mentioned. So Commissioner Flanagan.
I'm sorry, we need to ask for
Aye.
discussion first.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Is there any discussion before we move to a vote?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I would like to move to amend the vote.
Now I see how this works.
Yes. So I'd like to move to amend the vote, as I commented earlier, subject to language adjustments by General Counsel, to make the grant of the provisional license dependent upon the materials presented in the application,
Right.
and further add a condition that the applicant notify the commission and seek approval as appropriate pursuant to 935 CMR 500.104 of any changes in the materials described.
Right, and then what about Commissioner Title's
Oh, I'm sorry.
suggestion?
Yes, and that further the diversity plan described in the application be updated to provide further detail.
The community impact plan.
The community
Yeah,
impact. plan.
and that the commission will provide guidance in terms of what kind of detail we're looking for. Again, language to be developed consistently. So are you, can I ask for a motion to approve the suggested modifications?
I accept the modification to the
Okay.
motion.
Okay, so now,
I think we need to do the roll call vote on the
Okay.
motion too.
So-
Well, there needs to be a second, I think.
Right, Commissioner Doyle made a motion.
yeah, so can I have a second on Commissioner Doyle's motion?
Second?
Commissioner Flanagan, did I hear you correctly? You seconded the motion?
No, I did.
Commissioner McBride.
Through my voice, apparently.
Second time,
This
that's
is
happened.
complicated. Okay, let the record show that Commissioner Doyle made the motion to approve the staff's recommendation subject to the 3 modifications with language to be developed, seconded by Commissioner McBride. Can I have a voice vote starting with Commissioner Flanagan?
Aye.
Commissioner Title?
Aye.
Commissioner McBride?
Aye.
Commissioner Doyle?
Aye.
Commissioner Hoffman? Aye. Let the record show that the recommendation or the motion was approved by unanimous vote of the commission. Thank you.
That was just the vote on the
That was
motion to
the
amend.
Pardon?
That's just the amendment. Now we need to do the.
I thought it was going
As
to...
amended.
Underlying question.
Yeah, now we need to do the underlying question.
Okay, I'll get this right eventually. Can I have a motion then?
All set.
We're all set?
We are, it's already there.
Great,
We're just
thank
going
you.
for a vote.
Okay, then we're voting on the underlying motion. May I have a voice vote starting with Commissioner Flanagan?
Aye.
Commissioner Title?
Aye.
Commissioner McBride?
Aye.
Commissioner Doyle?
Aye.
Commissioner Hoffman? Aye. Let the record show that that motion carried by unanimous vote of the commission. Thank you. Okay, there is one last agenda item. As I mentioned, this was not something I was aware of when the agenda was posted, so I apologize that there's no advance warning, but Commissioner Doyle, as I mentioned, would like to make a statement on the Energy and Environment Working Group. Commissioner Doyle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to report that the Energy and Environment Working Group had its preliminary organizational meeting yesterday, and I would like to announce the membership as myself, Commissioner Kay Doyle, designee of the Executive Director, Sean Collins, and I will act as a non-voting member of the work group. Alex Pollard, Energy Efficiency Commercial Programs Manager, designee of the Commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources. John Fisher, Branch Chief, Commercial Waste Reduction and Waste Planning, designee of the Commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. And Taryn Lascola, Director, Crop and Pest Services Division, designee of the Commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. At this time, I'd like to move that the Commission accept these members and establish the Energy and Environmental Working Group, and further that the Commission delegate to Sean Collins, Executive Director, the authority to, as necessary, appoint future members.
Can I have a second on that motion?
Second?
Let the record show Commissioner Doyle made the motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner McBride. Any discussion? Then may I have a voice vote, please, starting with Commissioner Flanagan?
Aye.
Commissioner Title?
Aye.
Commissioner McBride?
Aye.
Commissioner Doyle?
Aye.
Commissioner Hoffman? Aye. Let the record show that the motion was carried by a unanimous vote of the Commission. Thank you very much. We are scheduled for our next meeting next Tuesday, the 26th of June, if my dates are right, 10:30 a.m. It will be here in the Health Policy Commission. So again, my thanks to the Health Policy Commission. There being no further business in front of the Commission, I would like to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Can I have a second, please?
Did we thank the staff enough times?
Can I have a second, please?
Second.
Voice vote again, please. Commissioner Flanagan, motion to adjourn.
Aye.
Commissioner Title?
Aye.
Commissioner McBride?
Aye.
Commissioner Doyle?
Aye.
Commissioner Hoffman? Aye. We are adjourned as of 2:55 p.m. Thank you very much, everybody.